Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? You know, as we were coming into the show, our producer, Matt, was giving us some instructions. He always gives the guests, like, Rob will introduce you and bring you in. And at the end of this one, he was telling our guest, Cecile Wehrman, she's the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association. Matt says, Rob will introduce the show, and then he'll bring you in, hopefully, which I guess is a jab at me for sometimes going off on diatribes and forgetting my guests, my co-hosts. Admittedly, it happens, but I take a little umbrage at that, Matt.
I thought it was well constructed the way that Matt delivered that blow.
All right.
Right before hitting record. I loved it. It was perfect.
Right before hitting record, punches me right in the ego, and then hits record.
Well, here's the deal. When you're punching around Rob Port, it's hard not to hit some ego.
Wow. Okay. Well, just slamming me left.
Welcome back.
Welcome to Plain Talk. We are going to be talking about newspapers. As I mentioned, our guest is Cecile Wehrman. She's the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association. She's also president of Journal Publishing, publisher of the Journal in Crosby and the Tioga Tribune, which I am a subscriber to both. And we're going to talk about the newspaper industry, which whenever everybody talks about the newspaper industry, it's always in the context of the newspaper industry is dying, which I think is unfortunate because it's not dying, it's changing. People still want news. And that's actually the topic of a survey that the North Dakota News Cooperative recently published. The survey was conducted. It was funded by a grant from the Bush Foundation, surveyed 31 newspaper executives, 53 editors, as well as almost 400 adults across the state about news. What they found is that most people, 53%, said the importance of their local newspaper is very important. 53%. Those just saying important was another 36%. You're talking about 89% of people saying that their local newspaper is important. Now, Cecily, that's certainly a nice result. I mean, for those of us who work in the newspaper industry, do I need to do full disclosure here and point out that my paycheck comes from the newspaper industry? It does. Obviously, I work for a foreign communications company, so I have an interest in this stuff. But one thing that worried me a little bit about this survey is that sometimes people tell pollsters things that they like to think about themselves that aren't actually how they. I like to tell my doctor that I eat a lot of vegetables. This is not true. I like to think that about myself, that I eat healthy. I don't. I think people should support the local newspaper and should support local news. And I think a lot of people like to think that about themselves. I'm a little worried that their actions sometimes don't carry that out.
Right. Well, I will tell you that one thing that was really neat about the public portion of this survey is that they did not qualify these people as newspaper readers before they launched into the survey. And the people who participated did not know that the purpose of the survey was to gather information about newspapers until obviously they started asking questions about that.
Good to know.
So it was designed to be a cross-section, demographically weighted across the state, rural versus urban, to get just a general public reaction. So if they were trying to say what the survey taker wanted to hear, they were really thinking fast because this was not something they had time to contemplate.
Cecile, one of the things in the survey that I think was good is it indicated that people are willing to pay more to keep their local newspaper afloat or going, which is, again, a nice thing to say. But how do you get them to actually do that, right? I mean, I think one of the experts that was in the article from the news co-op was, people buy a soda and a candy bar and not think anything about it. but then they'll look at their newspaper, which is half the price, and be like, well, I'm not going to buy that newspaper. So how do you get people to not only just say they value it, but actually pay for that?
Well, there's a couple of different things, and this is among the initiatives we'll probably be expanding on. We have had one newspaper group in North Dakota recently do some work with the lady whose statistics that you just mentioned, where those statistics originally came from, was Terry Finneman, who's a North Dakota native and a professor at a university in Kansas. And she has a program that she brings out to newspapers that she's been piloting in many states, where they go through a whole process changing the value proposition and how people view newspapers and gain understanding about the costs and the inputs that go into it. And that one newspaper group that did that was able to substantially raise their subscription prices with very minimal loss of subscribers once people understood that. And so, for one thing, we have to be a lot better at valuing what we do, and we need to be a lot better about promoting what we do. And so that's why one of the initiatives that's just started in the last couple of months is called Read Local through NDNA. And what I'm doing is trying to travel the state and talk with civic groups, schools, any kind of organization that's interested in promoting newspapers or having newspapers survive in their community, to try to understand that we need to pay attention to local news, not just all of the things that are bombarding us all day long on social media and through our phones. Newspapers are in the digital space too, and even our name sometimes is a detriment because people think about print, and people want both print and digital. And we have both print and digital.
Yeah. Although the people who want print is a shrinking demographic.
I will challenge you on that, Rob. We have research that shows that every decade of life, from the 18-year-olds to the over 65s, when we ask them what their preference is, it is evenly weighted at every decade of life between those who prefer print and those who prefer digital. So that's one of the misnomers that we need to blow up, is the idea that only young people want digital and only old people want print, because it's actually just a preference.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe that's my bias sneaking in. I don't understand the ongoing demand for a print product at all. But whatever, to different strokes, different folks. The market will sort that out. One thing that I think is really difficult is we are competing, and I think what you said about reminding people of the value of this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, people are getting subscription fatigue. Chad and I are baseball fans, and it seems like it's getting to the point where we have to subscribe to a half a dozen services to watch our team throughout the year. We're just being asked, and then all, the subscription, Netflix is going up, HBO's going up, all the different streaming services that I subscribe to, so my kids and my family, we can watch all the shows we want. We have to cut through that and point out, this is valuable. This is one of the ones you need to keep.
Right. And people feel like they're ingesting news all the time because they're on their screen and they're being fed all of this information from different sources, but we're just asking them to prioritize this trusted, what they identify as a trusted source, and support it with a subscription, because without that support, we're not going to survive. So I try to help people understand the difference of the value and the type of information and the source.
I think we could do a really good job of that in terms of we're doing a good job of covering the local sports teams that you care about, the local community events that you care about. I think where it gets harder and where we're competing with is that the sort of work, like work that's trustworthy, is usually complicated. It's not sensational. And sometimes it's sensational. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes the truth is very sensational, but a lot of times it's not the neat little soundbite that some Twitter influencer can push out where they've glommed on to one little thing and then they're blowing that up. What we do is a lot more complicated. And I think it's a lot harder because it's not as clear cut. It's not what we're offering you is not going to fit in to your biases as neatly as you might like. That's what we're up against. We're up against people. We're doing journalism that is sometimes going to report things that you don't like, versus I'm an influencer. I have a target audience and I'm only ever going to tell them what they want to hear. That's really hard for us. I don't know. I really struggle with how we overcome that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been being talked about right now about, the dopamine hit that people get when they're constantly being fed things that already reinforce views that they already have and that excitement level. But I think it's education, and it's also just basic civics and reading in schools. You know, our school children, a lot of them are learning everything on a tablet. So even at school, even though we're trying to get away from phones in schools, they're still on screens all day long. And while they're not being bombarded with websites, they're learning in a different way. And so that's one reason why one of our initiatives called Kid Scoop News that just expanded into the eastern part of the state is so important to give kids printed matter that they can handle and interact with, do activities with, and be exposed to a print product. Their teachers have told us it's the only printed matter some of them have in the classroom, which is just amazing for those of us who grew up with books.
So, Cecile, I think one of the issues that, when we're talking about online and digital content and getting subscriptions to your local papers and all that kind of thing, I think one of the issues is newspapers gave us that stuff for free for a long, long time. I mean, the idea of me having to subscribe to the forum, which I do, it's much. What's that?
You'd better, my friend.
Yeah, I do. But for a long time, I could just click on any Inform link and read the stuff online. So even before we came on today, we were talking about how the audiences for this podcast are different than Rob's column because of the paywall. And I don't know how many times you guys hear it, but I didn't read that because it's behind a paywall. And people are like mad at the newspaper for having a paywall.
My favorite is when they tell me about all the fun ways they've come up with to get around our paywall too.
Yes.
Thanks for stealing from my livelihood. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a high compliment when somebody screenshots a story out of the journal and shares it with everyone.
Yeah. So how do you get around that? I mean, it is like people like their local news, but if they can figure out a way to get it for free, man, it seems like they're willing to do that. And we were trained at the beginning of social media and all that everything was free. And so to get around that just seems really difficult, especially with all the whining about paywalls here.
Yeah, it's education. I mean, we have to tell the story, not that newspapers are dying, but that newspapers are an integral part of your community. And if you don't support your local newspaper, you're losing the engine that helps drive your local economy because it's a place to advertise. It's a place to get information. And, we're also having to educate about the fact that this advertising revenue model that has supported newspapers for 200 years is no longer working for us. So, there's all kinds of exploration about nonprofits, memberships, those kinds of things. But the most important thing that we are trying to do right now is educate people about what could be lost if the newspapers are not supported.
I don't know that people appreciate that. And again, this is coming from someone employed by the newspaper industry. So maybe people are going to listen to this and roll their eyes. But I think if a community doesn't have a strong, active newspaper or news source that is responsible and ethical, that does good, aggressive reporting, responsible reporting, and has a strong editorial voice, that community is hurt by that when it lacks that. Now, I would argue, and maybe Cecily probably doesn't want to, I argue I live in a community like that, where we don't have a very strong newspaper that does not have a very strong editorial voice. Mm-hmm. And I can look at the ways that our community is hurt by that at times. Things that get overlooked or the taxpayers or the voters get blindsided by something that should have been reported, but all of a sudden it's happening to them and they didn't know about it. And in a lot of ways, it's not their fault. They should have had somebody reporting that to them. A news story, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a newspaper. I mean, I'm medium agnostic. I want, good journalism can happen in a lot of different mediums. It doesn't have to be a newspaper, but it does have to be there. Like it becomes a voice of the community. Imagine Fargo without the forum. it's hard to think about it because that community needs an outlet like the forum talking for them. Now, again, that's me being self-serving, but
Right.
it's
Well,
it's
it's not
really
being
difficult.
it's not being self-serving, Rob, because if you look around North Dakota and the 72 newspapers that we have, only 10 of them are in population centers. Okay. So that means we have 62 communities in North Dakota where the newspaper is the only local news source. They don't have a radio station. The nearby TV station is not covering them maybe once a year. So what's lost is that oversight of local government, city council, county commission, and school
But
board.
also even beyond government and politics, I would argue cohesion in the community. Like, where do you go if you're putting on a bake sale or a street dance or something and you want to I guess Facebook, but I mean, the social media wilds are, very, very difficult. It's really hard. I mean, if the newspaper disappears, then you're stuck getting your news from randos on Facebook. And that's not a good way to do it.
Exactly. And I do want to share a couple of things before I forget. One is that this surveying that we're doing, I want to make sure to give credit to our partners. And actually, the grant recipient is the Rural Development Finance Corporation. And another partner is the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. And they're interested in this issue of preventing news deserts because their customer base is rural America. So that's why they're involved. And also when you were speaking to, a town that doesn't have a newspaper, sadly, the Tioga Tribune is no longer open. And I wanted to correct that, and I'm sorry we didn't talk about that beforehand, but we had to close that paper down in September 2 years ago, not because it wasn't making its way, not because it wasn't financially stable, but because we couldn't find a reporter. We advertised for months to try to find a reporter to come into that community, advertised locally, offered training, and we couldn't find anybody who was willing to take on that role. And me being at the Newspaper Association, I was no longer able to fill in that gap as I had in past times. So that's yet another issue is having how valuable it is that our newspapers are attracting journalistic talent from outside of the state, kids who have gone to college in other states, and bringing them into these communities to learn their craft and serve those communities. And that's getting harder to do too.
Cecile, you'd mentioned something about the business model and how the traditional advertising pays for a newspaper to employ the people they need to do. And that's broken, that it doesn't work anymore. And so you are starting to see, the North Dakota Monitor or other news services come in who raise capital either through donations or other ways. Do you see that as a path forward for newspapers, like raising capital, raising donations? And if that is, do you run into a situation where maybe the press isn't as neutral as it needs to be if you're getting donations to stay alive?
I really don't, because
Okay.
you guys, Rob knows as well as I do that if you're a journalist, you're going to take the hit. If somebody tells you, I'm not going to give you any money unless you do X, Y, or Z, you're going to say, well, thank you very much. And no, thank you.
You would hope.
So I don't see us bending our ethics in that regard. So that's a tough road to hoe. The problem with a nonprofit model for journalism is that in a state like North Dakota and these smaller communities, like just take Crosby, for instance, there's 2,400 people in the county. Okay, we have a circulation of 2,000, which is excellent. Some of those people obviously don't still live there, but there's not enough people who care about Divide County news to completely replace advertising. However, if everyone who did live in the county subscribed to that newspaper, when you're talking about whether you're talking about a donation or you're talking about subscription or membership, it's really the same thing. We just need to size it once people understand the value and why they should be willing to pay more than they're paying now.
I worked for a journalism nonprofit. And it was definitely right of center in their politics, but they were actually great. I mean, they let me do what I want. There wasn't. In fact, their only editorial directive was they didn't like horse race coverage. They didn't want coverage of this candidate and that candidate. They wanted policy. They were really focused on cover the policy debates, and that was really it. They might have been funded by the Koch brothers or something. I have no idea who their donors were. But I do worry a little bit about the nonprofit model, because I worry about whether the donors actually have a tie to the communities. And I do worry about an ideological agenda, long term, which it doesn't necessarily have to manifest itself in telling a reporter you have to write. Sometimes it can manifest itself in more subtle ways. I'm very suspicious of the nonprofit model, I guess, personally. But again, I mean, we need reporters. We need people there. And I think that's the hard part, because somebody who is covering a beat the right way is not going to make any one side happy all the time. You're going to make them happy some of the time, maybe. But I really think that's what we struggle with. How do we get the public back to saying, you need this? Because it kind of feels like telling people to eat their broccoli.
It does. Exactly. I fought that many times. Yeah. And it has to start with younger people. And 10 years ago, as a publisher of two newspapers, sitting in a rural area in North Dakota, I used to think I was competing with Facebook for eyeballs, and that was the problem, is that people were reading too much online to want to read the newspaper. Well, the light bulb went off about 4 years ago when I was exposed to the reading proficiency levels in North Dakota. The last time I checked, overall grades, it was 44% are reading at grade level. There are some schools in Western North Dakota where that number is as low as 29%. So it's a long play, but we have to be concerned about people not even liking or wanting to read. I mean, it's that fundamental. Aside from all of the other distractions and questions about who's paying and who isn't paying, and where the news is coming from and all of those things, if people don't like to read, newspapers don't have anything for them. And that spells disaster for our future workforce, our society, for understanding who to vote for, whether our rights are being taken away. And I mean, it's just that bedrock of an issue.
That is fascinating. I had not considered that at all. Despite the blowback I get sometimes when my adventures with vocabulary, and people accuse me of using too many big words, and I just kind of laugh it off. But that's
funny, Rob. People accuse you of using too many big words, and after every podcast, my wife tells me about how I use words incorrectly on this podcast. So we're a good balance for North Dakota.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to make it clear, my last question about paying, having donations. I think the North Dakota Monitor is doing incredible work in North Dakota, and I'm really excited about the work that they do. So I don't want people to think that was guided. And I would also say there's a lot of talk show hosts and other kind of media who are more than willing to change their opinion and have conversations based on who writes them a check. So I think that but those are commentators.
And, both the North Dakota Monitor and the North Dakota News Cooperative, which are, nonprofit, the News Cooperative was actually homegrown and an offshoot of NDNA. Those entities are providing their copy free of charge to local newspapers.
Yeah.
Which don't have the resources to cover state.
I have a problem when the North Dakota Monitor is out there asking for donors, saying we don't have a paywall. You can get your news from us and not have to pay for it.
Yeah,
that I thought was inexcusable. I mean, I am very suspicious of their long-term plan is to maybe put for-profit journalism out of business in favor of that. So I'm not a fan at all.
So Cecile, do we currently have any daily newspapers in North Dakota that print on a daily basis? I understand the form and there's constant content. Like, it feels like there's more content going, but it's more digital. I used to think of traditionally there was 10 dailies back in the day. Are there any dailies left, and who prints the most? Can you just fill that gap for me?
The Minot Daily News actually prints the most issues
Okay.
And I believe that's 6 days a week. And I have my handy dandy little media guide here to confirm that. The other papers now we call them multi-day papers. The Bismarck Tribune also publishes 6 days a week. So
Really?
yeah, hard copy. So they're definitely still out there, but yes, some of the other papers have gone to a 2-day a week or a 3-day a week model, but then they're putting up an online edition daily. And that's really just about trying to find that balance between and cost wise. And, I start talking about printing plants and access to printing, that's a whole nother ball of wax, along with the challenges we have from the US Postal Service, who likes to have a model that says we'll deliver your weekly paper within 2 to 9 days. I mean, that is almost
It's no longer
crazy.
news at that point. It's olds.
I will tell you, just to illustrate how digital first I am. I struggle. I write 2 print columns a week for on Wednesdays and then over the weekend. And my deadlines are Monday and Thursday. And writing 2 days ahead is a nightmare for me sometimes, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to be. I'm so in the moment. I don't write that far ahead. And so that's a struggle for me, which probably people who are veterans of this industry laugh at that. But that was hard. But I fell in love with newspapers early. I was a paper boy starting at 10 years old. For 8 years, all the way through a senior in high school. I delivered the Minot Daily News, 7 days a week. And I used to, every day after I would deliver the papers, I would come inside, I'd pour myself a big glass of orange juice, because a lot of times I was sweaty and tired from carrying all those papers, especially on Wednesdays and Sundays Wednesdays, they always had inserts, and Osco Drug always did one that like the Minot Daily couldn't automatically insert. So I had to insert 100 Osco Drug and lug these things around the neighborhood.
Let it go, Port.
Yeah. Well, hey, I did a lot of work, but I drinking that big glass of orange juice and then reading the newspaper. It's how I kind of fell in love with like the columns and the opinion. I started with the cartoons, but then I started reading about Ross Perot and stuff at the time. I remember reading editorial cartoons about Ross Perot and how funny he looked. They made him look, and I don't know. I fell in love with newspapers at a young age, and they still delivered. I mean, they deliver something that is absolutely vital, and we have to support them when they're local, and it's just so important, and it's a tough job to convince people of that right now.
Well, and Rob, I would also just add, we hear a lot about healthcare deserts. We hear about childcare deserts. We hear about grocery store deserts. Cecile, this is the first time I've heard the term news deserts.
Oh, really?
And I think that's an important part when we're talking about communities. There's lots of different components, and this is one of them.
Yeah. The news desert in our industry is a growing term. It's one that is starting to rub a little the wrong way, because there are newspapers. For instance, in North Dakota, there are 3 counties that don't have a resident newspaper, but that doesn't mean that they're completely without local coverage.
Sure.
There are neighboring newspapers who are trying to fill that gap, some more successfully than others. But this whole survey process has really forced us to try to look, and I'm even starting to say more often, local news organization rather than local newspaper, because, it could be that in those places where there isn't a resident newspaper, that we need to look at a different model that doesn't involve print. Just one quick little thing I want to share. Somebody said in our survey, it feels like the newspapers are archiving our neighborhood's soul with every edition. And,
Good.
that just says so much about how much these newspapers mean in these communities across the state.
Well, that's another treasure trove. Have you ever done genealogy, or you've tried to do research on a subject and you're going back and finding papers? Who do you think maintains all those archives and maintains that record of a community's history and growth and the good times and the bad times? It's your newspaper. And, even archiving it in a digital format is hard and expensive, and it's
Yeah.
worth supporting.
Try
So,
to go back and find something that somebody posted on Facebook 5 years ago. Good
yeah,
luck.
I try sometimes. I take deep dives into people's social media history sometimes. And it's not very easy. Cecile, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Fantastic stuff. The article, the survey that we were talking about, you can read about it at News Co-op. It looks like newscoopnd.org. But it's News Co-op, NEWSCOOPND.org. You can go there. They've got other great stories as well, but the story about this, and support your local newspaper because it's important. Cecile, thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
I was a little hard on the North Dakota Monitor in that segment. I think their reporting is fine, and I think they employ some good people. Their model, I think it's a mistake for the newspaper industry to embrace that. Because it fundamentally undermines our business model. I mean, they're giving the product away for free, and it's paid for by I don't know who. And I am not as I guess as easygoing about that as Cecile is. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I have a problem with them undermining local news produced by local businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like we're at a tipping point where folks do need to look at different models. But I think her overall point of people appreciating the value and the work and the cost of the work that's being done is really, really important. And people have to, I mean, Rob, you and I every day hear from people who are pissed off about paywalls. Every day.
Oh, yeah. I probably hear about it significantly more.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. People complaining at me like, why did you put this behind a paywall? Well, I'd like to be able to send my kids to college one day and pay my mortgage. I'm sorry. I mean, it costs money. It takes labor to make the news, and not just the reporters, but there's a whole. I mean, at the forum, there are so many unsung heroes. Thomas Evanella, Katie Young, Matt Von Panon. I mean, or Matt's the editor. So, but I mean, you probably don't know their names, but they do so much work. Making sure that what we put out is done correctly. I mean, my work would be significantly diminished in its value were it not for them. And they need to be paid too. They have families, they're people. It takes a lot of work. If you want this stuff to happen, you have to pay for it. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, you have to pay for it.
It's part of why I don't like the nonprofit, because I think it perpetuates the idea that you don't have to pay for this stuff.
Yeah.
You do have to pay for it.
Yep. And that's but if the public's not willing to pay, and it's still something that needs to be done for our communities, because I agree with everything that you were saying about city commissions, county commissions, school boards, state government, plus the bake sale. If the subscription model and the advertising model isn't working, do we need to look at different things, even if it's not ideal?
And I should say that in some ways it is working. We've seen at the national level a lot of success. Big companies like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they're finding success with it. Now, obviously, that's a very different business than we have. But even locally, I mean, I could tell. I don't want to give the impression that the forum is dying. Our subscriber base, our digital. Now it's a transition because we're seeing people moving from print to digital, which kind of drove some of my suspicion though, people still wanting a print product. I do think that's a diminishing market, but maybe I'm wrong.
I gotta be honest. You don't see people like if you're walking through an airport. Back in the day, everybody would have the paper, or even on an airplane.
Old papers laying all over the chairs.
Yeah, you don't see that anymore, which would also lead me to believe maybe people are more interested in digital.
I think so, but on the other side, we're doing okay. And that's why I think the newspaper, we got to start talking about it like it's dying. Old business models are dying.
Right. It's all about the business model.
New business models can take its place and are taking its place, and they are finding success. And the news isn't going anywhere. But the real struggle is locally, or I should say rural. Those are tough markets right now. But people got to get out there and you got to support. If you want somebody in that room at the county commission or the township or whatever, you got to pay for it.
And how about the fact she said the Crosby Journal there's 2,400 people that live in Crosby and there's 2,000 subscribers or something like that. There's a community that appreciates the newspaper.
Yeah. Although, that's probably there's probably a lot of people just Divide County in general.
For sure. Well, Divide County and expats, right? I mean, I know a lot of people who,
I get emails from people who are like, oh, I lived in Fargo 20 years ago. I live in California now, but I read your column every day because I like to know what's going on. And I hear from people like that all the time.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's great.
Makes sense.
That's wonderful. All right. We should probably talk about Charlie Kirk. And this is a hard topic to talk about. And I want to stipulate, and I know you do as well at the beginning, that his murder was an absolute gobsmacking, disgusting tragedy. This was a young man with a family. This is a young man who was exercising his First Amendment rights. And whatever we may think of his impact on national politics, and I don't necessarily know that it was an overall positive one, he didn't deserve to be murdered. Nobody deserves to be murdered. We were talking a little bit at the break about how, that video of him being murdered was almost unavoidable. It kept popping up in feeds. And I don't know how I feel about people seeing it. And sometimes I feel like people need to look at the evil in the eye to really understand its scope. On the other side, I think we're going through a moment of national PTSD from seeing. It's a terrible, terrible, disgusting thing. A lot of the response to it has been terrible and disgusting as well. And that's kind of the thing that I'm dealing with right now. I think we're having a hard time separating almost everybody, except for some creeps and extremists on the fringes, think that Charlie Kirk being gunned down on a college campus in Utah was a terrible, disgusting, inexcusable thing.
Yep.
You could still also believe that the Trump administration's response to it has not been great, and that Charlie Kirk himself maybe wasn't a figure that we supported.
So I was actually coming back on Wednesday from Larry Robinson's funeral. By the way, I appreciate you and Zach talking about Larry last week on the podcast because he was a great public servant. But that's when I heard about, Charlie Kirk being shot, and then obviously started to get some messages that indicated that he was likely going to pass away based on the footage that at that point I hadn't seen. And it made me sick, still makes me sick thinking about this guy and his kids and getting murdered.
Family, his friends.
Yeah, assassinated in the same way that the legislator in Minnesota got assassinated in her home, and another one was attempted to. The same way I felt when Steve Scalise was shot playing softball. The same way I felt when Gabby Gifford was shot.
Somebody took a shot at Donald Trump.
Yeah,
absolutely sick to my stomach. And somebody else attempted to later. Was it weeks later at the golf course? Luckily, They never even got a shot off. But
and it's the same way though, Rob, that I feel every time I hear about a school shooting or something. I mean, it's sick, and the people who are bringing this violence, political or otherwise, are sick people. And there's no monopoly on the left or the right for having sick people. And we have to figure out how to do better as a country. I don't know what the answer is. Damn, if you and I could figure out the answer, we would have done it a long time ago. But what we can all agree is this is not the way to do it. And we should all be disgusted and sick and queasy about this, about Charlie Kirk being assassinated.
Absolutely.
But I also told you before we did this is the most nervous I've been to do one of these plane talks in a long, long time. Because if people say the wrong words, there is something going on where there's people being targeted. And it makes me nervous to talk about this for 30 minutes and know that we have to be careful about the way we talk about this. I don't like that either. We should be able to talk about how we feel about things. And I agree, there's monsters on both sides who celebrate these things. That's not normal people. Those people are monsters.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're out there saying you're glad that he was shot, and that's what I wrote in the column yesterday, kind of trying to balance. I don't have cancel culture is a funny thing because I don't think it's cancel culture if the public reacts to you in a way when you say something that is just completely out of the norm. So if you're endorsing the murder of political figures you don't like and you lose your job because of that, I don't think that's cancel culture. I think that's cause and effect. You espoused a point of view that is extreme, that our society it does not endorse, right? You endorse that, and then your employer or what have you doesn't want to be associated with you anymore, that's cause and effect. I don't have any sympathy for people who lose their jobs because of that. I do have sympathy for people who are being targeted when you have the president of the United States using his megaphone that his position gives him to use this event to further divide us. And this insinuation that there's networks that, painting with this broad brush that the left, and they say, oh, well, it's the extreme left. Well, you tell me a Democrat that Donald Trump and his cohort don't think is extreme. They're painting with this broad brush and saying it's all of them. It's them. They did that to us. That, I think, is dangerous and wrong and disgusting, and not as disgusting as murdering somebody, but it leaves me feeling disgusted. And this thing too, where immediately, Charlie Kirk is being treated like he was a saint. He was not a saint. He said a lot of incendiary, inflammatory things that I found deeply objectionable. Again, shouldn't have earned him a bullet. And it's terrible that he died, and I'm not blaming speech for it. He has the same First Amendment rights that everybody. I agree with Charlie Kirk when it comes to the First Amendment. I'm an absolutist. There is no such thing as hate speech in terms of speech that we're going to make. I think there's hateful speech, don't get me wrong, and speech that I don't like and don't agree with. But as a legal definition, there's no such thing as hate speech that we can make illegal under the First Amendment. I agree with him on that. But I can't ignore the things that he said or the things that he was punching down. And I chafe a little bit at this idea that we're going to turn him into a saint, that he was not.
So I think to your first point about the ramifications of people saying terrible stuff on social media about this or other things. And I, with you, I'm a First Amendment guy. People have the right to say it. They also have to live with the cause or what happens when they say it.
If you're a car dealership and one of your salesmen is on social media making people mad, saying terrible things, I think you have a right to say, listen, I don't want my business associated with this person.
Now, what gets more complicated is when the employer is the government, right? I think that's where it gets more complicated. What is that line to fire a staff person? You need to make sure that you're not creating sort of a mob like effect that if somebody, says something, because right now it is what you just said about Charlie Kirk not being a saint or disagreeing with some things, that's a bit controversial to say right now, that people are looking at anything associated with Charlie Kirk in very black and white terms. Now that he's passed away, assassinated, murdered, we have to ignore everything that he said. I mean, I'm left of center, right? I disagreed with a lot of the things that Charlie Kirk said. That doesn't make me a bad person because I haven't fallen in line that the guys, again, we should all agree that political violence, and I actually appreciate some of the ways that Charlie Kirk engaged the opposition to have actual conversations. I think that's good for our country. But we have to be able to still be able to talk about things in a way that isn't just so black. And there's nuance in all these things. One thing that there is a nuance on is political violence is terrible. And this was a tragic, tragic thing done by one person, not some left-wing sort of conspiracy, by one really, really deranged person.
I really liked some of the comments that Utah Governor Spencer Cox, who's a Republican, as you would imagine, because he's in
Utah.
And the thing about it, and I'm trying to find it right now, but it's essentially, he was saying, get outside, touch some grass. And it really bothered me that, he got some blowback from that, because I think he was right. Like he's calling people, calm down, cool down. What really bothered me is I think the world of influencers, left and right, looked at Charlie Kirk getting murdered and thought that's content. Right? They didn't see a tragedy. They thought, what can I say or what can I do about this that's going to cut through and it's going to get me trending. It's going to get me going viral. And so what that drives is a lot of very sensational things. I think a lot of people who said awful things about him dying, condoning it or whatever, I think it was a performance. I think they were saying something. Attention. And I think on the other side, just going over the top with Kirk, I think that is performative as well. He was a human being and he had flaws and he didn't deserve to be murdered. And he had flaws just like you and I have flaws. I mean, I'm not saying he was different in that regard at all. He was one of us. He was an American and he was gunned down while engaging in his First Amendment rights. And that's a terrible, terrible thing for all of us. But the way we've reacted to it, I think, has been a national disgrace, left and right.
So you brought up Spencer Cox, and I want to call out one other thing, communication that I thought was really, really good, because I agree with you on Spencer Cox, that I think that the governor of Utah has done a really good job of trying to calm things down, which I don't know if anybody can really calm things down because we have people who are also lighting it up. But the First Lady Armstrong joined a bunch of fellow first spouses and putting out a statement the next day. Same sort of thing. We need to calm things down. We can disagree without coming to this point. And I was proud of her. The First Lady of South Dakota signed on to it. Tim Walz's wife, Gavin Newsom's wife. Right? It's a really, really broad bipartisan group. But it was a great statement. And that's what we need from leadership right now. We need leaders who are calming things down, not accelerating the division or accelerating. Like I've talked to you about this. I didn't like when J.D. Vance went on national TV and said if somebody says something about this assassination that, you should report it to their employers or you should do this. I don't think the vice president should be sort of calling out
organizing an online mob.
Yeah, it seems like that's below him.
Well, below him, I think it's also it's just a disgraceful thing to do no matter who you are. And then when you're using the megaphone that comes with the vice presidency to do that, it's wrong. Hey, by the way, Governor Cox, Steve Bannon, is now calling for him to be investigated because of his comments. Some of the things he said is that, this is what he told Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, NBC News. He said, I believe that this is Governor Cox now. He said, I believe that social media has played a direct role in every single assassination and assassination attempt we have seen over the last 5 or 6 years. There's no question in my mind. Cancer probably isn't a strong enough word. What we have done, especially to our kids, it took us decades to realize how evil these algorithms are. I agree with that.
So do I.
I agree with that. But the problem is that who he's pushing back on when he talks about those algorithms is people like Steve Bannon, who rely on those algorithms, who have got famous, who make a living now. Steve Bannon and a whole galaxy of other influencers left and right who exploit those algorithms to get their audiences and make their living. That's their power, is that they're pushing inflammatory things. And so Spencer Cox firing a cruise missile saying, check out from that stuff. Talk to one another. Get off social media. It is terrible for people like Steve Bannon's business model. And so, of course, they're going to now the governor should be investigated because he told people to calm down. Come on.
And Spencer Cox wasn't calling out the right or the left in that statement. He was saying as Americans, for God's sakes, I wish we could just identify as Americans sometimes. When he was assassinated again, when Representative Horton was assassinated in Minnesota, those are times where we need to be Americans. There are times where we should all just be able to say this is terrible. And I will say, when Representative Horton was assassinated, there were a lot of Republicans who said, "Oh my God, this is a terrible thing." Lots of Republicans.
I would say, like if you want to
just like
rank and file Republicans,
most Democrats now are saying this is a terrible thing. Let's focus on those folks and how we can work together to help create a place where this kind of stuff does not happen. Because we talked about trauma and PTSD. I talked to some of my friends on the left the other day who were like, obviously I didn't agree with everything Charlie Kirk said, but I'm affected by this. This guy was around my age. This guy had kids. This is the country that I'm raising my kids in. And so again, this is all of us who are affected by this in a really negative way. So now's the time where we need to come together, not divide us even more. And I just wish, again, Spencer Cox, the first spouses. I mean, there's some really great examples about around. We just currently aren't getting that from everybody.
No, because again, I think what gets you juice on the internet is saying something inflammatory, and then also like finding the examples of someone who's very extreme on the left or very extreme on the right, finding that example and saying this is the left, this is the right, as if they represent everybody there. I'm on the right. Steve Bannon doesn't represent my point of view.
Right. And
but again, let me ask you that question specifically. When he says that every single assassination attempt is connected to social media, that's a bold statement. And I'm inclined to say, when you say every single, when you speak in absolutes like that, I think that, but I think if you wanted to say that most of them are influenced in some way by people being radicalized on social media, I think he's got a point.
I think he's got a great point. And again, it's not the right or the left, it's both. When you're just being fed the information you want to hear and you see the other side as evil, or, that's going to radicalize you in some ways, and it's not healthy, especially if there's people who are predisposed to mental illness or other things like that. But I'm trying to think back in any of these cases, if there weren't like examples of them being radicalized online, and I think the Governor Cox, I agree, shouldn't speak in absolutes all the time, but the vast majority, I can't think of one that's not, where the social media was not involved.
I think he's got a point. I mean, we don't have to prove the absolute,
right,
to have a good point. And I mean, I'm to the point where I as much as I have argued, about the cell phone ban and everything, I think that's downstream from the greater problem, which is what people are accessing with those cell phones. I think that's the thing that we need to be attacking. And we need, and I don't know how we do it, but the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Twitters of the world, all of TikTok, we need to come down with them on a heavy hammer. Now on the other hand, I don't want to crush dissent. I don't want the politicians to make it easier for them to accumulate and keep power because they've made it harder for people to communicate and discuss and engage in legitimate First Amendment topics. But these business models are built around making money from pitting Americans against one another. And that's got to stop.
Thinking about Governor Cox and his comment about go outside, and I did do sort of I tried to avoid social media and cable news for the last week because I knew it wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for my mental health, whatever. And the last 2 nights I've been at Evan's flag football game. And last night watching him play flag football, I was thinking, not one of these kids knows if the other kid supports Donald Trump or not. None of the parents were talking about it, whatever. I don't know how that's not a cleansing thing. How is that not to go out in your community and be around each other? Rob, you don't know Coop's friends. Are they talking about politics? Are they maybe a little bit, but
Coop asked me who Charlie Kirk was, because I think even as a 10-year-old, it bled through into his.
Evan asked us if one of Donald Trump's friends got killed.
But you're right. When I get together, sometimes people ask me about, because they know what I do for a living and they want to talk politics with me, and that's fun. And usually those conversations out in the real world are always respectful. People disagree, but they're fine. They're respectful and they're great. And I enjoy having them with people. And I don't want people to be afraid of talking about politics, because we're Americans and it's part of being a citizen. But I do feel like, you get online though, and it's a different world.
World.
And I think that's the problem, is online it's not real. Like, it's not real. So much of what you're seeing, the memes you're seeing, a lot of time they're exaggerated. They're not true. What we're all doing is when we get online, because we all want likes and we all want our content to get attention, even if you don't do this for a living, you don't put up a post about politics and not want to get a bunch of comments and likes. And what's the way to get a lot of comments? You say something sensational, you say something outrageous, and that's what gets you there. And again, I'm not even arguing against, because I am controversial at times. I know that. But I think the difference between me and a lot of people is I will take a controversial position when I think it's the right position. And I'll admit when I'm wrong, and I'm not making up facts, and I'm not going to lie to you about things. But I don't mind. So it's not even being controversial. It's not even, having a debate or having an argument. All of those things are fine. But it's this idea that we have to hate one another, or that the other side, the left, the right, that is disgraceful.
Yeah. And who is, like, when the president's saying the left did this, or, I didn't do this.
Yeah.
I'm on the left and I didn't do this.
When I posted on Facebook, because I like everybody else, I was just kind of in shock as the news was coming through, and I just put up a Facebook post, saying something along the lines of it's disgusting, and if you're this sort of person, I wrote, I'm absolutely sickened by the violence in Utah today. If you believe what someone says justifies arming them, you're part of the problem. One of the first comments to pop up was from a guy who said, "You did this, Rob. You did this. You're to blame for this." He said, this is the actual comment. "You're to blame, Rob. You and your leftist buddies. Time for you to retire and be done with your career of hate." That was one of the first responses. And the thing about it is that's exactly the sort of thing that'll get you a lot of attention on social media.
Right.
It's posting that sort of a thing.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, you got called a clown a lot yesterday on one of your columns about this. That must be a new thing that, I don't know if it's the algorithm or what, but I don't know. Again, we're not in a position where we can talk about anything associated with this. And I hope we can get there, because it's disgusting, it's terrible, and we have to do better as a country.
Look at the crap each of us get for even doing the show with one another. There's people that don't want you talking to me. There's people on the right that don't want me talking to you. But we're going to do it anyway, because it's good for us. Hey, we got to get rolling, though. Thank you so much for listening, as always. Remember, you can always follow us on the social media things. We're always Plain Talk ND is our handle: TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X. Call or leave us a voicemail. Leave us a voicemail, or send us a text, 701-587-3141. Certainly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
When you're punching around Rob Port, it's hard not to hit Tamigo. Wow.
Okay. Well, just slamming me left and right.
Welcome back.